Hey guys, tonight we drift into a story that starts where human curiosity meets the clouds. Imagine yourself standing in a wide, open field, the sky stretched like a giant canvas above you, painted in shifting greys and pale blues. The air smells of dust and rain that hasn't fallen yet. You tilt your head back, and for a moment you wonder, what if people could make the clouds listen, like obedient pets? What if storms bent to machines instead of chance? Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this ride if you expect human hubris to end well. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments, because there's something cozy about realizing that scattered listeners everywhere are lying in bed under the same restless sky. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking back through time, long before satellites, computers, or scientists scribbling equations about atmospheric thermodynamics. Picture ancient Mesopotamia, where sky-gazing priests charted the stars and invoked gods with chants to coax rain from the heavens. You shuffle along dusty stone steps toward a temple, where offerings smoulder, goats, incense, sometimes desperate little figurines, all pointed upward in hopes that moisture will descend. It sounds theatrical, but this was weather modification, version 1. Across the Mediterranean, Egyptian farmers looked anxiously at the Nile. Too much water, and crops drowned. Too little, and famine clawed its way into every home. They learned to track cycles, but they also tried charms, chants, and curious contraptions. Reed bundles shaken like rattles to summon a breeze. It wasn't just faith. It was a mechanical attempt, however tiny, to sway nature. Historians still argue whether those rituals were meant purely for comfort or whether people truly believed in mechanical influence. Shift again. You're in Greece, listening to philosophers ponder. Aristotle, earnest as ever, sketched out theories of exhalations, hot and dry versus cold and wet, that supposedly birthed weather events. He's basically making the world's first climate model, except with a strong side of guesswork. His followers tinkered with bronze spheres and water clocks, believing that by observing patterns in miniature, they could learn to push the sky itself. It's like those kids who think shaking a snow globe might change the real snowfall outside. By the time you wander into medieval Europe, superstition had joined forces with spectacle. Villagers sometimes shot flaming arrows into the clouds, a noisy, fiery plea for rain. In Switzerland, church bells were rung not just for worship, but to scatter storms. You can almost hear the clang in the distance, echoing across valleys, while peasants look up nervously, wondering if it works. Fringe tidbit here. In some parts of France, people genuinely tried launching cannon fire upward to break hailstorms, a tactic equal parts weather experiment and stress relief. Mainstream history fact. Records from 14th century chronicles mention that certain communities actually fined individuals who were accused of weather witching, literally being blamed for drought or hail. Legal codes had punishments laid out, which shows just how desperate humans were to blame someone for the whims of the sky. And yet, even amid the rituals and finger-pointing, mechanical imagination kept bubbling up. You arrive at the Renaissance, where Leonardo da Vinci himself jotted sketches not just of flying machines, but also of devices to study how air moved in swirls and eddies. He was less about summoning rain, more about understanding how wind danced. But you know Leonardo, give him long enough, and he'd probably build a rain button machine out of gears and pulleys. Historians still argue whether his notebooks hint at serious weather engineering ambitions, or whether they were just doodles of an endlessly curious mind. Fast forward to the Age of Enlightenment. Imagine salons filled with candlelight, scientists debating while thunder rumbles outside. Electricity had just been discovered, shocking frogs' legs, lighting lamps. Some bold thinkers asked, If lightning is electric, could we harness it, maybe even direct it? Ben Franklin flies his infamous kite in a storm, strings sizzling with risk. You lean over his shoulder, whispering that maybe don't, but of course he doesn't listen. In a sense, Franklin's stunt was both an experiment in physics and a symbolic first step toward the idea that storms might be manipulated by machines. Here's a fringe nugget. 18th century experimenters believed firing cannons during festivals could attract. The loud blasts supposedly stirred the air and forced clouds to let go of water. And guess what? Sometimes it did rain. Pure coincidence, but enough to make people swear the trick worked. You smile because it feels like humanity's oldest pattern. Mistake correlation for causation, then sell tickets. As you stroll through this long corridor of history, from temple rituals to lightning kites, one thing stays constant. Humans hated feeling powerless under the sky. When crops wilted or floods swallowed homes, they needed to believe they had buttons to press, rituals to repeat, or gadgets to deploy. And in that need was born the seed of a dream, that someday, with the right machines. The atmosphere itself could be choreographed like music, but the air remains stubborn tonight. Clouds swirl, winds shift, and even after thousands of years, you're still looking up with the same mix of awe, anxiety, and ambition. The real machine age of weather control is just ahead of you, humming with steam engines, patents, and promises you probably shouldn't buy into. You shuffle forward in time, boots crunching on gravel roads now lined with telegraph wires and chugging locomotives. The 19th century is a noisy place, filled with invention and bold promises, and naturally, someone decides it's the perfect era to sell the sky. You can almost hear the carnival barkers already. Step right up, folks. Rain on demand, guaranteed or your fields stay dusty. Here's the thing. Farmers desperate for water were willing to listen, and ambitious men were more than happy to provide demonstrations. In the American West, one rainmaker named Charles Hatfield strutted into town with his secret chemical formula. He would build tall wooden towers, climb up with his vats and pipes, and burn a mysterious mixture that released fumes into the sky. Townsfolk watched, wide-eyed, as smoke coiled upward and clouds began to gather. When rain actually came, sometimes coincidentally, they hailed him as a hero. Other times, when nothing happened, they quietly packed up their disappointment. Historians still argue whether Hatfield's concoction had any atmospheric effect at all, or whether he was simply the luckiest con artist in a very thirsty world. Hatfield's most infamous moment came in 1915, when San Diego hired him to fill their nearly dry Morena Reservoir. He agreed, claiming he could make it rain until the reservoir overflowed, and it did rain, so much that floods ripped through valleys, destroying bridges, homes, and lives. Hatfield insisted he wasn't to blame, while the city refused to pay him. You glance at him standing there, drenched in a soggy suit, insisting with wide-eyed sincerity that the catastrophe proved his success. That's one sales pitch you probably don't want to survive. But he wasn't alone. All across Europe and the United States, inventors were sketching devices and filing patents. One quirky tidbit. In 1871, a French engineer patented a system to detonate balloons filled with explosive gas high in the atmosphere, hoping to shake loose rainfall. Imagine farmers craning their necks as colourful balloons drift upward, followed by muffled booms, like a 4th of July show designed by someone who hated umbrellas. Then there was the idea of concussion theory, the belief that loud noises could trigger clouds into releasing rain. You remember those medieval cannons? Well, 19th century scientists dressed it up with more math, but it was basically the same trick with a fancier moustache. The used S. Government even ran official concussion experiments in the 1890s, firing artillery into the sky during drought. When rainfall didn't immediately follow, reports got creative. Moisture observed at a distance, one claimed, which sounds suspiciously like Maybe it rained somewhere, right? Meanwhile, newspapers gobbled up the drama. In an era where progress meant everything, a rainmaker's arrival was front-page news. You walk through dusty towns, posters plastered on walls, Professor so-and-so promises clouds on cue. The showmanship was half the science. Farmers would pay a cut of their harvest if the man delivered. If not, well, you could always chase him out of town with pitchforks. There's a mainstream historical fact hiding in this carnival. The US Signal Service, a precursor to the Weather Bureau, actually authorised some of these experiments in the 1890s. Yes, government-backed rainmaking with cannons and explosives. It shows that the line between scientific experiment and public spectacle wasn't always clear. And it wasn't only about rain. Some patents dreamed of machines to push storms away, scatter fog, or even bend lightning bolts. You flip through yellowed patent drawings, tall towers with rotating fans, copper wires strung like harps across fields, even giant reflective panels meant to nudge sunlight where crops needed it. It's equal parts visionary and ridiculous, but every page whispers the same dream: control. One fringe tidbit you can't ignore. In Texas, there was a man named Robert Dyrenforth, a Washington lawyer with zero meteorological training, who convinced Congress to fund him as the nation's first official rainmaker. He set off explosions in the sky and bragged about success, but witnesses mostly reported dust, smoke, and confusion. Newspapers ridiculed him as dry henceforth, yet he kept insisting his science was sound. Historians still argue whether he was just naive or knowingly cashing in on desperation. You pause, leaning against a wooden fence, watching as Hatfield's towers creak in the breeze. It's a strange mixture of hope and hucksterism. These rainmakers. On the one hand, they gave drought-stricken communities something to cling to. On the other, they embodied that uniquely human blend of showbiz and pseudoscience, where a confident grin could stand in for data. And you can't help but smirk at the pattern. Every generation thinks it's the first to have cracked the code of the clouds. The ancients rang bells, the medieval shot cannons, and the Victorians filed patents. Always the same desperate wish that maybe, with enough noise, smoke, or paperwork, the sky will finally listen. Your eyelids droop a little as you imagine those smoky towers, the hiss of chemical pots, the distant boom of cannons. The smell of rain teases your senses, and for a fleeting second, you almost believe the tricks are working. But the real science, the kind that could truly meddle with clouds, is waiting just beyond this century, cold, crystalline, and chemical. You step gingerly into the 20th century, where the carnival smoke clears and laboratory glass takes over. Gone are the flamboyant rainmakers shouting promises in dusty town squares. Instead, you find white-coated scientists bent over bubbling flasks, squinting through microscopes, and scribbling equations on chalkboards so fast the chalk dust clings to their sleeves. The question is the same as ever: can we make the sky obey? But the tools are finally sharp enough to pierce the mystery. Inside a chilly lab in the 1940s, you see a chunk of dry ice hissing on a metal tray. A young researcher notices that when he tosses a piece into a supercooled cloud chamber, ice crystals suddenly bloom like frozen fireworks. You lean closer, watching delicate hexagons multiply until the whole chamber looks like a snowstorm in miniature. That's Vincent Schaefer, working at General Electric, stumbling onto the first reproducible evidence that clouds could be seeded into rain or snow. It's the laboratory equivalent of shouting Eureka and actually having the sky answer back. Here's your mainstream fact. Schaefer's work, alongside Bernard Vonnegut, yes, brother of the writer Kurt, laid the foundation for modern cloud seeding. Vonnegut discovered that silver iodide crystals mimic the structure of natural ice and serve as nuclei for moisture to condense upon. That discovery turned weather modification from folklore into a field with peer-reviewed papers, government contracts, and aircraft ready to spray the skies. But don't let the white coats fool you. Quirky detours still lurked. One fringe tidbit. Early researchers genuinely tried seeding clouds with finely ground cement dust. Their reasoning? Cement particles might provide surfaces for condensation, and besides, it was cheap. The results were, well, imagine mixing home improvement projects with thunderstorms. Let's just say no cement-based weather empire ever emerged. Still, optimism ballooned. If you could seed clouds with silver iodide and trigger rain in a test chamber, why not do it on a real storm? You walk with Schaefer to an airfield, where a small propeller plane sits fueled and trembling. He loads dry ice into the cargo hold. The pilot's goggles glint in the morning sun. They roar into the sky, slicing through cold, moist air. Schaefer leans out with gloved hands and drops pellets of dry ice into the cloud tops. Minutes later, flurries cascade downward. Snow, born on command. You rub your eyes. Did humanity just invent the snow button? Historians still argue whether that single flight was truly decisive proof or just a spectacular coincidence. But the psychological leap had already been made. Suddenly, the old rainmakers with their wooden towers seem quaint. Now the machines are aircraft, chemicals, and precise physics. You can picture the newspaper headlines, "Scientists manufacture snow." The public eats it up, even as critics whisper that as maybe Mother Nature isn't so easy to boss around. Meanwhile, Schaefer and Vonnegut's colleagues start dreaming bigger. Could we not only make rain, but also stop hailstorms from wrecking crops? Could we weaken hurricanes, redirect fog, even manage droughts at continental scale? You imagine the boardrooms where generals and government officials lean forward, eyes gleaming at the thought of weather as a tool, maybe even a weapon. After all, if you can make it rain on your side of the border, could you withhold it from your enemies? Of course, every breakthrough brings debate. Some meteorologists rolled their eyes, insisting the atmosphere was too complex for these experiments to matter. Others believed the age of controllable weather was at hand. Historians still argue whether the enthusiasm of the 1940s and 1950s was justified by evidence or inflated by Cold War ambition. For you, trudging through this history, the shift feels visceral. Instead of mystical rituals and cannon fire, the atmosphere is now something you could bottle in a test chamber, tweak with crystals, and perhaps command with levers. It's equal parts thrilling and unnerving, like watching a toddler learn to drive. And the images stick in your mind. Dry ice hissing like a snake. Snow flurries born from human hands. Silver iodide crystals shimmering like microscopic keys designed to unlock the sky. You can almost hear the hum of propeller engines and the nervous laughter of scientists on their first rides into clouds, wondering if their jars of chemicals would actually work. The carnival barkers of the past promised rain for coin. These new scientists promised data, reproducibility, and carefully graphed charts. Yet deep down, both spoke to the same yearning, to never again feel helpless while staring at a parched field. You can almost sympathize, because even now, standing at the edge of a chemically seeded cloud, you feel a rush of relief at the thought that maybe, just maybe, someone has found the sky's hidden switch. But switches, as you know, can flip both ways, and soon enough, the same science that dazzled in small-scale experiments would be unleashed on storms so large they filled entire horizons. The tinkering had only just begun. You push forward into the late 1940s, where optimism about cloud seeding has ballooned into audacious full-scale experiments. The lab results are no longer enough. Scientists want to play with storms the size of cities, and the military is more than happy to lend aircraft, funding, and a dash of secrecy. You can almost smell the kerosene on the airstrip as you step into the world of Project Cirrus. Picture this. October 1947, a B-17 bomber loaded with canisters of dry ice lifts off from a Florida base. Inside, scientists fidget with clipboards, eyes darting to the horizon where a tropical storm churns. Among them is Vincent Schaefer, the same man who once dropped dry ice from a little prop plane to birth a flurry of snow. This time, though, the stakes are enormous. Instead of a harmless cloud, they're about to poke a living hurricane. You lean against the metal fuselage, listening to the engines drone, and you can't help whispering, maybe this isn't such a good idea. The bomber circles the storm's outer bands. Schaefer signals, and chunks of dry ice tumble into the clouds. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the hurricane seems to twitch, its spiral tightening, its eye shifting. Hours later, reports come in. The storm has veered unexpectedly, slamming into Savannah, Georgia. Damage runs into the millions, and locals are furious. Whether the seeding caused the shift or the hurricane simply followed its natural path is still debated. Historians still argue whether Project Cirrus genuinely influenced the storm or whether it was coincidence wrapped in human arrogance. Mainstream historical fact. Project Cirrus was the first large-scale attempt to modify a hurricane, jointly run by General Electric, the ULS, Signal Corps, and the Office of Naval Research. It marked the beginning of decades of official weather control programs. Of course, the media had a field day. Headlines screamed about scientists steering hurricanes. Radio announcers painted the researchers as mad tinkerers with storm levers in their hands. You can almost hear the incredulous laughter over breakfast tables. What's next? Weather on tap like beer! Meanwhile, the scientists scrambled. Public backlash was fierce, and General Electric quickly distanced itself. The image of a company responsible for wrecked homes and flooded streets wasn't exactly good PR. Schaefer and Bernard Vonnegut went back to quieter projects, muttering that perhaps they'd flown too close to the sun, or, in this case, too close to the eye of the storm. Still, the dream didn't die. The militaries, ever intrigued by the possibility of harnessing weather, quietly kept files open. If seeding could even maybe influence a storm, wasn't it worth exploring? You imagine generals in stiff uniforms, leaning over the maps, plotting how clouds could become allies or enemies. The idea of climate as weapon had planted its first real roots. And then there's the quirky tidbit. While Project Cirrus was in the headlines, other researchers were tinkering with backyard-sized machines. One inventor in New Mexico built giant ion emitters he swore could nudge rainfall. Locals would gather to watch the contraption spark and hum, its metal rods buzzing like angry bees. Did it work? Probably not, but it made for a great Saturday show. Back on the coast, the lesson of Project Cirrus lingered like salt spray. The scientists had crossed a threshold, from quaint rainmaking towers to machines that could meddle with titanic storms. And you feel the unease in your bones. It's one thing to coax a snow flurry out of a cold cloud. It's another to potentially reroute a hurricane with millions of lives in its path. You walk through the battered streets of Savannah in the aftermath, where residents sweep mud from porches and hammerboards over shattered windows. Some mutter about bad luck, others about divine punishment. A few point fingers at those weathermen with their experiments. It's the eternal human reflex. If something goes wrong, someone must have pulled the wrong lever. Historians still argue whether this moment was the birth of true weather control or the death of its innocence. Either way, you can't shake the image. A bomber circling above a vast, spiralling storm, tiny pellets of dry ice tumbling down into chaos. It's almost cinematic, except the consequences were painfully real. And so the story slides forward. The public may have been spooked, but governments and militaries were hooked. If weather could be nudged, twisted, or even just slightly adjusted, the possibilities, both hopeful and terrifying, were endless. You keep walking, storm winds tugging at your sleeves, knowing this is only the beginning. The experiments will get bigger, the ambitions stranger, and the moral questions far darker. You step off the drenched streets of Savannah and find yourself in a very different theatre of storms. Jungles, rice paddies, and monsoon skies hanging heavy over Southeast Asia. It's the 1960s and 70s now, and the Cold War has stretched into every corner of the globe, including the weather. You hear the distant whine of helicopters, the thump of rotor blades, and realise you're about to walk into one of the strangest chapters of military science, Operation Popeye. The idea was deceptively simple. If cloud seeding can trigger rain, then why not turn the sky into a weapon? During the Vietnam War, military planners wanted to slow enemy movement along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Trucks, troops, and supplies depended on dry dirt roads. Add a little extra rain, though, and those paths could turn into quagmires of sucking mud. And so, airplanes began flying seeding missions over Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, releasing silver iodide into monsoon clouds. Mainstream fact: Operation Popeye ran from 1967 to 1972, officially under the slogan "Make Mud, Not War." The program seeded thousands of clouds, reportedly extending the monsoon season by weeks in some areas. Whether the results were decisive is still contested, but the ambition was breathtaking to militarize the weather itself. You tilt your head back, watching a C-130 Hercules roar overhead, its underbelly fitted with canisters. Pilots drop their payload, and silver iodide disperses invisibly into the clouds. Minutes later, the sky darkens, and sheets of rain hammer the jungle canopy. Soldiers slog through rising rivers, their boots squelching. For them, the rain isn't just uncomfortable, it's a calculated weapon. Here's your quirky tidbit. American pilots nicknamed some of these seeding planes Rainmakers, a wink back to Hatfield and the carnival tricksters of earlier days. Except now, instead of small-town fairs, the experiments were written into Pentagon memos stamped top secret. Not everyone was thrilled. Critics in Washington worried about the ethics of tampering with weather in foreign nations. You can almost hear the congressional hearings, where senators raise eyebrows and mutter, "So let me get this straight, you made it rain on purpose." Publicly, officials downplayed the program, but whispers spread fast. By the 1970s, when details began leaking, the backlash was intense. Wasn't it a violation of sovereignty? Wasn't it tampering with nature in ways that could spiral out of control? Historians still argue whether Operation Popeye actually achieved its military goals, or whether it was more symbolic than strategic. Some reports suggest measurable effects, more rainfall, bogged-down trails. Others claim the data is too patchy, the atmospheric chaos too great to assign credit. But the ethical fallout was crystal clear. The program spooked diplomats worldwide, leading directly to the 1977 Environmental Modification Convention, ENMOD, a treaty banning the military use of weather modification. You can picture the meeting rooms in Geneva, diplomats fanning themselves under ceiling fans while nervously drafting clauses. The language is careful. Hostile use of environmental modification techniques is prohibited, which is bureaucrat speak for, don't turn clouds into weapons. Yet the very need for such a treaty proves how real the fear had become. You can't help but notice the irony. For millennia, people begged the sky for rain to save their crops. Now, governments were using the same science to wash out enemies. The rain that once symbolized life had become a tool of war. And here's another odd detail. Some Vietnamese villagers, seeing sudden downpours drench their fields, whispered about curses or supernatural punishments. After all, how could anyone imagine invisible particles from planes had twisted the weather? Rumours spread of vengeful spirits, while the truth, silver iodide and military ambition, remained hidden in classified files. As you walk deeper into the jungle, the rain hisses off broad banana leaves. The air smells of wet earth, metal, and smoke. You hear the splash of boots and puddles, soldiers cursing as their rifles rust. Above it all, the clouds roil, heavy with manipulation. The atmosphere itself has become a battlefield. Historians still argue whether this was a turning point, whether Operation Popeye proved humans could weaponize the sky, or whether it showed just how limited such efforts really were. Either way, the consequences lasted far longer than the storms, for decades afterward. Any mention of weather control carried the shadow of militarization, secrecy, and suspicion. You wipe the rain from your eyes and step out of the jungle, knowing that the experiments wouldn't stop here. If militaries could meddle with monsoons, surely they would try again with bigger, more dramatic storms. And that next ambition was waiting just beyond the horizon, swirling in the Atlantic. You drift now into the restless decades of the mid-20th century, when meteorologists dreamed not just of making rain, but of taming the most violent storms on Earth. Project Storm Fury was born in the 1960s, carried on the wings of aircraft that roared into the spiraling hearts of hurricanes. The idea was deceptively simple. Seed the storm's eye wall with silver iodide, force the storm to grow a new eye, and weaken its fury before it reached shore. Imagine the scene. Research planes darting between sheets of rain, instruments rattling as scientists dropped canisters into the boiling clouds. Radar screens flickered, radios crackled, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though humankind might sculpt hurricanes like clay. Storms such as Beulah and Debbie showed promising signs. Winds eased, eyes reformed. The press hailed the scientists as weather tamers, guardians against disaster. But the hurricanes proved far less obedient than the dream. Sometimes winds dropped, sometimes they did not, and the data muddied with each sortie. Nature was not a machine with simple levers. It was a symphony too vast to be conducted by silver smoke alone. Critics argued that natural fluctuations explain the changes, not the seeding itself. By the 1980s, funding dried, the project fell quiet, and the vision of storm sculptors dimmed into history. Yet, Storm Fury left behind more than failed ambitions. It gave meteorologists a treasure of data, advanced hurricane-hunting aircraft, and deepened knowledge of storm physics. It showed that even when grand hopes falter, the pursuit itself sharpens human understanding. And as you listen, you might feel the hum of engines fading into the distance, replaced by the steady breath of your own. You're safe, outside the tempest, held gently as the story carries you forward. You drift now into the higher sky, where weather meets the thin veil of space. In the mid-20th century, scientists looked upward, not just to the clouds, but to the ionosphere, that shimmering layer where charged particles dance with the sun's light. If clouds could be seeded, perhaps the upper atmosphere could be nudged, tuned like strings on a hidden harp. They built radio heaters, massive arrays of antennas that pulsed energy into the heavens. These experiments were not storms of thunder, but storms of radio waves, heating patches of sky and watching ripples of auroras shimmer in reply. To the public, the idea sounded like wizardry, invisible beams stirring the very fabric of the air. Projects with names like Hypus, ESCAT, and later the famous HARP were born. To the scientists, they were tools for understanding communications, navigation, and the behavior of particles dancing at the edge of space. But to many outside the labs, they became sources of fascination and unease. Rumours grew. Could these antennas steer weather, control minds, even summon earthquakes? The truth was more modest. The ionosphere is vast, and human transmitters are like whispers against a roaring sea. Yet these whispers taught researchers how radio waves bend, how satellites communicate, how cosmic storms ripple through the Earth's magnetic shield. As you imagine those antennas pointing skyward, silent fields of steel under northern lights, you may feel the hum of energy smoothing into a lullaby. What once seemed ominous is, in this quiet telling, only part of humanity's restless reaching, a curiosity that never sleeps. The horizon shifts eastward now, and you find yourself standing not under American skies, but beneath the sprawling ambitions of other nations that also looked upward with calculation and desire. The Soviet Union, ever eager to match or outpace its Western rivals, poured resources into atmospheric research that often blended pure science with unmistakable state power. You picture bleak concrete labs in Siberia, radar dishes tilting like metallic sunflowers, and teams of meteorologists in grey coats sipping bitter tea while sketching charts of clouds meant to bend political will. One of the most famous Soviet projects was the attempt to redirect moisture over vast agricultural zones. The vision was almost cinematic, clouds corralled like herds of cattle, rainfall delivered on command to thirsty wheat fields, and parades assured dry weather through cloud-busting rockets. Historical records confirm that during major events in Moscow, including state parades, the military launched silver iodide flares to clear the skies, a ritual blending science and theatre. Historians still argue whether these methods were genuinely effective, or whether favourable winds and a bit of the luck deserved more of the credit. Meanwhile, in China, the idea of managing the skies took on its own distinct scale. By the 1960s and 70s, Chinese meteorologists, under direct state orders, experimented with cloud seeding across drought-stricken provinces. You imagine farmers gazing upward as planes trace smoky lines overhead, officials promising rains that would quench rice paddies. In later decades, especially around the Beijing Olympics of 2008, the state proudly announced its Weather Modification Bureau had launched thousands of rockets to ensure clear ceremonies. The debate lingers. Was it science, or was it more a show of control designed to impress the world? There were also quieter, stranger Soviet ambitions, whispers of ionospheric modification and Grand Canal projects to redirect rivers toward arid lands still echo through old documents. One fringe tidbit suggests planners even dreamed of melting Arctic ice to open northern trade routes decades before climate change made it a grim reality. Whether these were serious engineering schemes or just bureaucratic fantasies scribbled on paper, historians still debate. As you stroll mentally through these state programs, the scale feels both awe-inspiring and faintly absurd. Gigantic bureaucracies directing clouds, writing weather forecasts as if they were military commands, and treating the sky as one more extension of human territory. And yet, in your drowsy state, you find it oddly soothing. The certainty of planners, the steady hum of rockets firing off like lullabies, and the strange confidence that even the heavens might bow to policy. It is, of course, only partly true. The weather does as it pleases, but the image of those rockets streaking upward, little sparks against grey skies, lingers in your mind as you sink deeper into this tale of restless human ambition. The night air cools as you wander into the territory of storms and the uneasy idea that humans might weaponize the sky itself. The line between science and strategy blurred sharply during the Cold War, when governments considered the weather not only as a tool for harvests but as a weapon of war. You imagine shadowy meetings in dimly lit rooms, military officers leaning over maps while meteorologists unrolled charts of monsoons, their discussions about rainfall sounding less like forecasts and more like battle plans. The most infamous example remains Operation Popeye, a US military project during the Vietnam War. Planes released silver iodide into the monsoon clouds, hoping to extend the rainy season, flood supply routes, and bog down enemy troops. The official slogan, "Make mud, not war," feels almost like dark comedy. Soldiers slogged through sodden trails, supply trucks stalled in swollen rivers, and the line between nature's fury and human interference became impossible to draw. Historians still argue whether Operation Popeye had any decisive effect, or whether the monsoon simply raged as it always had. This wasn't just an American curiosity. Both superpowers eyed possibilities of using weather as a force multiplier. Could hail be intensified to destroy crops? Could fog be summoned to conceal advances? In fringe documents, some even speculated about creating artificial hurricanes or lightning weapons, concepts more at home in pulp science fiction than reliable science. And yet, in the fevered atmosphere of the arms race, No idea seemed too far-fetched to at least sketch out on paper. Quirky tidbits emerge here too. One 1950s US proposal seriously considered painting the Arctic ice black to melt it faster, in the hope of opening northern shipping lanes and perhaps altering global circulation in ways favourable to Western agriculture. It reads today like satire, yet those memos were real. Meanwhile, rumours swirled about Soviet experiments with long pipelines designed to push warm air northward, or vast mirrors in orbit that might redirect sunlight. Whether these were genuine projects or propaganda exaggerations, historians still debate. As you drift with this story, the thought that nations once tried to steer wars with clouds feels both chilling and faintly ridiculous. Imagine generals waiting for rain reports the way others might await news of reinforcements. Picture an officer proudly announcing, "We've seeded the clouds, sir. Reinforcements are pouring in, literally." You almost hear the muffled chuckle of the weather itself, refusing to be commanded. And yet, in this twilight retelling, the danger softens into a kind of atmospheric lull. The sky is vast, humanity's schemes are small, and though storms can be violent, they're also the background hum of our planet, rocking you gently like waves on a dark ocean. The militarization of weather is a sobering chapter, but here, beneath your blanket, it becomes part of the longer tale of human restlessness, fading into the white noise of rain on a distant roof. You keep drifting, and the clouds above you begin to glow with an otherworldly sheen. The story shifts now to the time when weather control slipped from classified military projects into the realm of conspiracy theories, half-whispered rumours, and late-night radio chatter. Here, the science blends with myth, and the hum of antennas becomes the background music of fear. The crown jewel of these conversations is the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, better known by its tidy acronym, HAARP. Built in Alaska in the 1990s, HAARP was officially a research facility designed to study the ionosphere and improve radio communication. Rows upon rows of towering antennas stand like a frozen metallic forest, reaching skyward, pulsing radio energy into the thin atmosphere. To scientists, it was a laboratory. To everyone else, it became a lightning rod, pun intended for suspicion. Fringe theorists claimed HAARP could stir hurricanes, trigger earthquakes, even bend thoughts. The image of scientists quietly flipping switches to redirect storms halfway across the globe became irresistible fodder for tabloids and conspiracy talk shows. Historians still argue whether public distrust stemmed from Cold War secrecy, genuine misunderstanding of complex physics, or simply the human love for blaming strange weather on something tangible. There are quirky footnotes too. At one point, local Alaskans joked that HAARP could help them with mosquito control if it really had so much power. Others swore that odd light displays in the sky, faint auroral ripples, were proof of sinister experiments. And yet, when HAARP's data was made public and the facility was later transferred to the University of Alaska, most of the science looked surprisingly mundane. Charts of ionospheric density, notes on radio wave behaviour, and measurements that helped satellites communicate more smoothly. Still, you can't entirely blame people for being suspicious. The weather has always carried mystery, and when governments admit they've tried cloud seeding, weaponized rain, or clearing parades with rockets, the leap to they control everything doesn't feel quite so far. Add the fact that storms and earthquakes remain unpredictable even today, and the idea of a secret weather machine almost feels comforting. It implies someone is in charge, even if it's in the shadows. As you picture those lonely Alaskan antennas standing silent under auroras, their long shadows stretching across the snow, the scene feels less ominous and more like a lullaby. A chorus of metal trees humming to the sky, their energy flowing upward, vanishing into the cold night. Whether myth or machine, HAARP has become part of our cultural dreamscape, a reminder that even in modern times, the sky remains a canvas for both science and story. And here you are, tucked into that story, eyes half closed, listening to the quiet buzz of imagined antennas, a sound that could just as easily be the hum of your bedroom fan. The story drifts now into the quieter laboratories of the modern era, where experiments are less about rockets and secret bases, and more about precision, sensors, and climate anxieties. You find yourself in a glass-walled research facility, humming with computers and glowing monitors. Here, the new vision is not military conquest or political parades, but the possibility of steering an increasingly unpredictable climate. Scientists today call it geoengineering, and even the word sounds like it belongs in a science fiction paperback. Instead of trying to wrangle a single storm, these projects imagine nudging entire planetary systems. One mainstream idea is stratospheric aerosol injection, releasing fine particles high above the Earth to reflect sunlight, cooling the planet the way volcanic eruptions do. You probably remember Mount Pinatubo in 1991. It erupted, sent sulfur into the stratosphere, and lowered global temperatures for nearly 2 years. If a volcano could do it by accident, perhaps people could do it on purpose. Historians still argue whether such artificial cooling would stabilize the climate or simply shift disasters to different regions. Another approach looks down rather than up. Marine cloud brightening. Ships might spray seawater into the air, thickening and whitening clouds so they reflect more sunlight. The image is oddly whimsical. Giant ships puffing sea mist like overgrown whales, trying to shade the Earth. Quirky fringe proposals go further still, space mirrors orbiting the planet, or giant floating kelp farms sucking carbon from the air. You picture them like props in some dreamlike stage play, half practical, half absurd. And yet, for all the futurism, small-scale weather modification remains alive. Countries still seed clouds during droughts. Insurance companies quietly sponsor hail suppression programs to protect crops, and ski resorts sometimes use snowmaking not only on slopes but in surrounding valleys, claiming they're coaxing more winter weather. Whether those claims stand up to scrutiny, historians still debate. There is something oddly soothing about the shift. The militarized bravado of make mud, not war has softened into spreadsheets, climate models, and university workshops. Scientists talk about radiative forcing in tones that sound almost like bedtime chants. And though the stakes are higher, rising seas, burning forests, the imagery is calm, particles drifting like silver dust, clouds painted brighter with a misting spray. As you sink deeper into this chapter, you feel the hum of modern anxieties blending with old ambitions. Humanity still wants to guide the weather, but the tone is different now, less about commanding the sky, more about negotiating with it, pleading with it, almost apologizing as we try to undo what our smokestacks and engines have stirred. And in that quiet tension, with computer models glowing in the dark and researchers sipping late-night coffee, the atmosphere itself seems to sigh, a slow exhale, rocking you gently towards sleep. You find yourself now wandering into the realm of mega projects, those outsized dreams that belong half to engineers and half to poets. These are the ideas that stretch far beyond cloud seeding or ionospheric heating, into the territory where human ambition seems to forget its own limits. Take the Soviet plan to reroute rivers in the 1960s and 70s. Engineers drew up designs to reverse the flow of Siberian rivers, sending water southward to irrigate deserts in Central Asia. Imagine tugging on the veins of the Earth itself, forcing them to run backward like rewinding a film. Critics at the time warned of ecological collapse, fisheries destroyed, and entire regions destabilized. Historians still argue whether these plans were serious blueprints or simply propaganda symbols of technological might. Meanwhile, in the United States, visionary scientists floated their own eccentric schemes. One proposal, space mirrors, giant reflective sheets orbiting Earth, capable of bouncing sunlight where it was needed. A nighttime city bathed in daylight, or frozen farmland thawed with a flick of cosmic glass. Another, cloud catchers, mountain-sized nets strung across landscapes to harvest fog and funnel it into reservoirs. Quirky, Absolutely. But patterns exist for some of these ideas, hidden away like half-forgotten dreams. Then there's the fantasy of ocean fertilization, scattering iron filings into the sea to encourage plankton blooms, which would soak up carbon and cool the planet. The image is almost whimsical, giant ships sprinkling iron like salt shakers over endless blue waves. And yet, when small-scale trials were attempted, results proved unpredictable. Some areas bloomed green, while others fizzled. The ocean, it turns out, has its own stubborn personality. A fringe tidbit here comes from speculative architecture. Proposals for weather domes, transparent shields built over entire cities to block storms and filter climate. It sounds like the set of a retro sci-fi film, domes glowing under the stars, safe from wind and rain. Whether such structures could ever be built, historians still debate. You smile faintly at the sheer audacity of it all. Humanity, perched on a small blue planet spinning through infinite space, decides it will not only seed clouds or heat ions, but rebuild rivers, cover cities, and command the sun itself. It's hubris, certainly. But in your drowsy state, it feels like a lullaby. These projects become not threats, but bedtime stories of impossible machines, fairy tale inventions whispered into the night. As you sink deeper, the images soften, rivers shimmering backward like silver threads, domes glowing softly over quiet cities, mirrors drifting high above like guardian moons. They become less like schemes and more like dreams, dissolving gently into the slow rhythm of your breathing. The story carries you forward into the realm of weather forecasting itself, where prediction and control blur in curious ways. You picture massive computer rooms, screens glowing with swirling clouds, the steady hum of processors almost like a lullaby. If earlier experiments tried to push the sky around, the modern age has leaned into simulating it, building digital twins of storms, then nudging those simulations to see what might happen. The roots of this approach stretch back to the mid-20th century, when mathematician John von Neumann proposed that if we could model weather accurately, we might someday control it. In the 1950s, his early computer models tried to simulate atmospheric flows, clunky by today's standards but revolutionary in ambition. Historians still argue whether von Neumann truly believed control was achievable, or whether he used the language of manipulation simply to capture funding in a Cold War climate hungry for grand promises. Now, the forecasting tools are astonishing. Satellites track moisture and heat across the globe, feeding supercomputers that crunch trillions of calculations each second. Quirky tidbits emerge here. In the 1970s, some forecasters joked that their computers were so hungry for data, they practically wanted to eat the weather itself. Today, with AI models entering the scene, forecasts can extend farther ahead with surprising accuracy, though they still falter at times, especially with hurricanes, which remain moody and unpredictable. And so the line reappears: if you can simulate, can you control? Climate researchers play out what-if scenarios, introducing artificial aerosols or tweaking carbon levels inside their virtual Earths. Some argue these simulations are rehearsal spaces for future geoengineering. Others counter that they're just maps, not levers, and that the real atmosphere resists the tidy logic of models. Historians still debate whether humanity has crossed into a new era of atmospheric influence, or whether we remain at the mercy of storms, just with fancier charts to comfort us. As you imagine these glowing weather rooms, screens filled with looping storms, there's something strangely calming about it all. Forecast maps resemble works of art, worlds of colour drifting across oceans, like Van Gogh's brushstrokes alive on digital canvases. The scientists sit in swivel chairs, sipping coffee gone lukewarm, watching storms spiral like lullabies on their screens. And here, the atmosphere feels less like an adversary and more like a companion, chaotic, yes, but also patterned, rhythmic, and endlessly fascinating. You settle deeper into this vision of the weather not as something to conquer, but as something endlessly observed, endlessly modelled, endlessly dreamed. The narrative drifts into popular culture, where weather machines escape the lab and become icons of imagination. You step into the glow of old comic books, movie theatres, and radio dramas, all of them filled with humming devices that promise godlike power over the sky. If scientists were cautious in their memos, storytellers were anything but. They gave their characters levers and dials that could summon lightning, clear the skies, or drown cities at will. In 1939, the pulp magazine Amazing Stories ran tales of inventors who built storm cannons, blasting clouds apart with sonic booms. Later, comic book villains wielded weather dominators, threatening heroes with instant blizzards or hurricanes. The imagery stuck, a lever pulled, a storm unleashed. Historians still argue whether these stories reflected public fear of real experiments, or whether they simply exaggerated timeless myths of human control over nature. Cinema picked up the theme. Think of Bond villains promising world domination via climate control, or animated series in which mad scientists summoned snow in July. The quirky part. Some of these fictional devices were modelled after real patents, like a 1950s design for a giant ion beam gun that allegedly could disperse clouds. The patent existed, though no one proved it worked. In the public imagination, however, the line between real and unreal blurred delightfully. Even children's cartoons played with the trope, cheerful inventors pointing ray guns at skies, creating rainbows on demand. You picture a Saturday morning audience giggling as characters slipped on cartoonish hailstones, unaware that somewhere out there, scientists really were launching silver iodide into clouds. It's almost as if the fiction softened the reality, wrapping sharp experiments in candy-coloured absurdity. The weather machine became a cultural shorthand. Politicians joked about it during droughts, newspapers used it in headlines, and conspiracy theorists adopted it as proof that governments hid the real levers of climate. And through it all, audiences kept dreaming, because what could be more appealing or terrifying than the promise of flipping a switch and rewriting the forecast? As you sink into this section, the imagery grows playful, spinning dials, glowing orbs, caped villains standing against thundercloud backdrops. It becomes less threatening and more like a bedtime cartoon projected onto the inside of your eyelids. You chuckle softly at the absurdity, then drift a little further into the comfort of story. Because in the end, whether in a lab or a comic strip, the weather machine is more dream than device, an idea that refuses to vanish, humming gently in the collective imagination. The story drifts now into the present day, where the myth of weather machines finds its strongest foothold not in laboratories or comic books, but in the wild chatter of the internet. You picture glowing phone screens in dark bedrooms, forums buzzing at midnight, and YouTube thumbnails screaming about secret government weather weapons. The old Cold War paranoia has slipped into the age of memes and hashtags, where suspicion spreads faster than any storm. Every hurricane, every flood, every unexpected heat wave now seems to carry a shadow question. Was this natural, or was it engineered? Conspiracy theories swirl around disasters like a second, invisible storm. Some point to HAARP, long decommissioned yet still imagined as a hidden switchboard for global weather. Others claim chemtrails, the white streaks of jet exhaust, are not condensation, but deliberate sprays altering clouds or controlling populations. Historians still argue whether these beliefs are rooted more in political distrust or in the simple human urge to explain what feels uncontrollable. The quirky part is how seriously some communities take it. Homemade weather detectors appear in backyards, cobbled together with copper wires and jars of salt water, as if ready to catch stray signals from the sky. Entire websites catalogue suspicious cloud shapes, convinced that ripples in the sky prove manipulation. Whether earnest or satirical, it's often hard to tell. Meanwhile, real science keeps tinkering at the edges. Nations openly run cloud seeding programs during droughts. Insurance companies quietly sponsor anti-hail rockets to protect crops. The irony is that while conspiracy theorists imagine vast, all-powerful machines, the actual technologies remain humble: tracer flares, silver dust, and small tweaks that rarely live up to their promises. And yet, the belief in hidden controllers persists. There's comfort in thinking someone, somewhere, holds the levers, even if they use them badly. Because the alternative, that storms are chaotic, random, and unstoppable, feels far scarier. As you lie back now, you can almost hear the low murmur of internet voices blending with the hum of the wind outside. Their theories are wild, sometimes laughable, sometimes unsettling, but they are also deeply human. In the endless noise of modern life, they become a kind of lullaby, anxious, imaginative, restless, echoing the same old wish to make the sky obey. As your eyes grow heavier, you drift with the image of those secret medical schools, hidden in barns and taverns, lit by lanterns and hushed whispers. You imagine the eager apprentices, memorizing every word, every bone, every detail, knowing that their survival and their future patients depended on this forbidden knowledge. It feels almost like a bedtime tale, doesn't it? A hidden world where people risked everything simply to understand the human body. You've travelled far tonight, through shadows of science, through risks and punishments, through the whispered secrets that laid the groundwork for modern medicine. Now, let yourself rest. The story is complete, the strange experiments and hidden schools fading like candlelight at dawn. Close your eyes, take one last deep breath, and let sleep carry you away. Tomorrow will come, but for now, you are safe in the quiet, cradled by history itself. Good night. May your dreams be gentle, your rest be deep, and your night filled with peace.